there again, I think the thing is that sometimes Wall Street gets confused between risk and uncertainty. This is an example of getting confused between risk and uncertainty. If SCO was a business with very high uncertainty, but the risk was very low.
Mohnish Pabrai, one of the most successful value investors, recently sat down with the MBA students at NUS Business School for a value investing masterclass. And my God, this video is being undervalued by YouTube because it currently only has about 35,000 views, and it is an absolute goldmine of investing lessons. I don't know if you can hear that, I'm pretty sure you can, but they're tearing down a house across the road. So we have the lovely background noise of whatever the hell that is. They've been doing it every single day for the past week, so I have to make a video. So unfortunately, we're just gonna have to deal with it. In today's video, I'm simply gonna be sharing some of my favorite clips from this interview. The interview goes for about an hour, and I recommend if you want to see the whole thing, you can go check it out. I'll leave it linked down in the description below. But today's 10, 15, 20-minute video will be a breakdown of some of the best clips, and I'll also share my thoughts on them as well. If you enjoy these kinds of videos, I've got a ton of other interviews that I want to be doing this kind of breakdown on. So if you enjoy this content and you want to see more, make sure you hit that subscribe button so you stay up to date when I post new content. But with that said, let's jump into the first clip.
The next question is, what do you think about people who think that value investing is dead?
All intelligent investing is value investing. So people have this misnomer that there's growth investing and value investing, and they're two separate things. It's two sides of the same coin. So what we're trying to do with investing is we're trying to put out $1 today with the hope that we get more than $1 in the future back. And how long it takes to get $2 back or $3 back and such will determine our rate of return.
I really love the line where Mohnish says that all intelligent investing is value investing. It's absolutely true. All investing, when you're actually doing an analysis of a company or any other kind of investment, is just assessing the relationship between what you pay, what you outlay, and what you get back. If you're not assessing that relationship, and doing that relationship is value investing, it's looking for businesses where you have to pay a lot less than what you get back in the future. Anything that is not going through that process is pure speculation, because unless you can reasonably figure out what you're going to get out of the business, or as we'll discuss a little bit later in some of these clips, at least if you can measure the downside risk, what is the very least amount you're expecting to get out of it, if you're not doing that, then you're just speculating.
It took me a long time to get there, but if you buy a dollar bill for 25 cents and it's not going to change much in value, and you're correct about that it's worth $1, you'll make 4 times your money. And depending on how long it takes to make 4 times your money is whatever your annualized rate of return is. But if you are able to invest in a Starbucks relatively early, they could have almost an infinite number of stores globally. And the unit economics are so good. In the US, when they open a Starbucks, in 18 to 24 months, they get all their money back that they put into a store. And internationally, they get it in 12 to 15 months. It's an incredible business. I mean, your ROEs are off the chart. This is unlevered returns of like 60, 70% unlevered. And with an ability to create an infinite number of coffee shops. I mean, in Manhattan, they would put 4 coffee shops on 4 corners, and none of their businesses went down. They all did well. So the holy grail is to find the great compounders, where the dollar becomes much more valuable. You don't necessarily need to even pay much less than $1, as long as you're right on the growth prospects.
He also talks about how all really high-performing investments, or at least most high-performing investments, have a significant element of growth. And again, I agree. I think there's a lot of people who bog themselves down in avoiding any company with significant growth opportunities because it gets immediately labeled into the growth investing, speculating, gambling basket, when that is just absolutely not true. Of course, as Mohnish says, we would love to buy businesses that are worth $1 and buy them for 25 cents or 50 cents. And if that's the case and the business is worth $1 and stays worth $1, then we will make, a double or a triple or a quadruple on our money. But ultimately, if we want to see a really high performing investment, We want to buy a dollar for 50 cents, but then ultimately we hope that that $1 turns into $4, $5, $6, or maybe even $10. And while it's certainly the case that people get euphoric about new businesses and expect massive growth in the future that most of the time isn't realized, it's also the case that sometimes it's reasonable to project that a business is going to grow at 10 or 15% per year. Especially over the last 2 decades, we've really seen another type of growth, a new type of fast growth be unlocked with businesses that have recurring revenue for the sale of digital assets. This allows those businesses to scale massively, expand internationally very, very quickly. And that's just something that businesses that had physical locations or required some kind of expansion physically in terms of machinery or buildings, it's just something that those businesses could not achieve before the internet and this style of business came along.
I don't think you should approach investing top down. I have never approached it top down. I haven't said, I need to invest in tech and now let me go find the best tech play, or I need to invest in blockchain and let me go find the best blockchain bet and so on. I think for me, it's a lot more opportunistic, where you're reading a value line and you suddenly see some funeral services at 2 times and you had no plans until then to ever invest in funeral services ever in your life. And there you go on a journey that you never thought you'd be on. And I talked about this a few times in the past, but in 2018, I was visiting Turkey, visiting a bunch of companies. I have a good friend there who's kind of like a Ben Graham type investor. And so I just told him, listen, I'm coming to Turkey. Can you just go meet all the businesses in your portfolio? He said, oh, that'd be so much fun, Mohnish. Let's go do it. And he took me to this one company where they were the largest warehouse operator in Turkey. The liquidation value of their warehouses was really easy to calculate. They had about 12 million square feet. It was close to $1 billion. And they had about $200 million of debt on it. So, 800 million, book value, if you will, or market value. And the stock was at 20 million. And they had a bunch of other assets besides I bought 1/3 of that business for $7 million. And then it went up like 6-7 times in value in the next couple of years. Still undervalued, still big gap from 800 million, but we're not in any hurry. So what I'm saying is that it's bottoms up. I didn't go into Turkey even thinking I'm going to make an investment in Turkey.
Here, Mohnish talks about how you shouldn't look at investing as top-down, meaning you shouldn't try and find companies in particular fast-growing or popular industries. And I agree with this mostly. I think that it's certainly true that over time, different industries will go through different short-term issues, short-term problems, regulations, that sort of thing, whereby there are unique opportunities in one industry and then the next year, the opportunity will be in a different industry. So certainly, I think you need to open your mind to looking at a broad number of industries, but I think it needs to be coupled with a significant amount of discipline to avoid looking at areas that you don't deeply understand. So for example, back in 2020, when the markets collapsed, there were a couple of industries that were hurt really, really badly. One of them was, of course, the restaurant industry, let's say in the US, for example, because there was physical restrictions on those restaurants, and a lot of restaurants were loaded up on debt, which meant they were really struggling to survive during that time. So the restaurant industry during that time was a particularly good opportunity to look for maybe a really good business that wasn't struggling and was just pulled down with everything. And also during that time, I happened to already have had a very deep understanding of that industry, and it's a relatively simple industry to wrap your head around anyway. So all of those things kind of lined up, and I looked for an opportunity and I was able to find one. On the flip side, more recently, there have been a lot of companies in China, Alibaba, for example, and Tencent, that have been beaten down by a lot of uncertainty around regulation coming from the government and other things going on in China. So again, that particular industry, tech, let's say in China, may have some good opportunities there. But in this case, it's an area that I don't deeply understand. And no matter how hard I looked at Alibaba, I really wanted to learn and understand it deeply. I just couldn't. I never felt confident that I could project forward as to where that business would be in the future. This next clip from Mohnish Pabrai is probably the best clip out of the entire interview. It's a gold mine, and I want to share an example of how I'm actually applying what he says here, or hoping to apply what he says here in an investment over the next couple of months.
There again, I think the thing is that sometimes Wall Street gets confused between risk and uncertainty. This is an example of getting confused between risk and uncertainty. If SCO was a business with very high uncertainty, but the risk was very low. So when you generally run into a combination of very high uncertainty, very low risk, the end result is usually going to be very high return.
In this clip, Mohnish is describing how the uncertainty of the future of a business is not the same as the risk of that business. Now, I personally haven't thought about risk and uncertainty in this way previously. I tend to think of the risk of a business as uncertainty in future cash flows, but the way that Mohnish Pabrai describes it here actually makes a lot of sense. What he's talking about here is the risk of a business losing you money being different from the uncertainty about what may happen to that business in the future. So for example, you might have a business that is very, very likely going to go bankrupt. That would be a business you would describe as one that has a lot of risk because it's very likely to lose you money. And you would also describe it as being relatively certain, right? It's pretty certain that that business is going to lose you money. If it's in bankruptcy, it's very likely going to lose you money, right? The opposite of that business is something that Mohnish is looking for, which is something that has relatively low risk of losing you money. So its core business is very, very strong and is likely to deliver at least positive returns. But maybe on the upside, it has significant opportunity to grow, something that you can't project. You don't really know. It's uncertain about how big that business will be in the future, but it's all upside, so it doesn't really matter that it's uncertain. In those cases, they can produce high return investments. And I hadn't thought of using risk and certainty in this way before, but this is actually how I've been thinking about potentially making an investment in Netflix if it reaches an appropriate price, because certainly Netflix's future is uncertain. They have to produce a lot more content, a lot more localized content in many different countries around the world. And there will be varying success of them capturing those local markets, and whether that content can also be usable to kind of spread around the world and viewable and enjoyed, I should say, by people in all different countries. How much value will they get out of that localized content, for example? But at the same time as that being relatively uncertain, I think it's pretty low risk that the business would lose money, given the fact that they're a recurring revenue business with extremely high retention rates, which is a demonstration of their deep competitive position. They have strong pricing power, an amazing management team, and a bunch of other features of the business, which makes me feel as though it's very unlikely the business is going to lose money for investors, assuming you pay an appropriate price. So that essentially means that if I get the opportunity to invest in Netflix, where even if I'm likely to make only a 10% return, for example, because I think the downside risk would be so low, that would be a worthy investment, because in all likelihood I'll make 10% and that's fine. That's still a decent return over time. But I'm investing in a company with the opportunity for the upside to be significantly more. So as a result, I think not at its current price, but at a certain price, Netflix would fit into the category of a business where I would say it is high uncertainty, but low risk, and therefore has the potential to be high return. And then Mohnish Pabrai goes on to give his own example of one of these low risk but high uncertainty businesses that he invested in all the way back in 2000.
But I was trying to find a way to play that arena where I have upside without downside. And I found a way to play that with Silicon Valley Bank. So Silicon Valley Bank, it's a very unusual bank. It's headquartered in Silicon Valley, and their clients are mainly venture-backed tech companies. Their main clients actually are the top flight venture capitalists, because Silicon Valley Bank has got a lot of expertise in dealing with tech companies. So the VCs know that they can get reporting from them, which is better than they can get from other places, because they understand what the venture capitalists are looking for. The VCs in their term sheets would say, you need to send us these reports, show us the balances, whatever else. And they've got great reporting to them. The other thing they've got is that because it's almost like the captive lenders. So when a company gets venture capital, they don't want to spend that money buying servers and furniture and so on. Those things they would rather finance, right? So the money they raise goes further. And Silicon Valley Bank is really good at financing those things. So if a company is looking to buy $250,000 worth of servers, for example, computer equipment, they'll make that loan. And again, for them, it looks like a captive, because if the company goes under and they get title to those servers, they are financing those every 3 days with some other. So they could go to some new startup and say, listen, I can give you all the servers at half off. What Silicon Valley Bank did is, whenever they made loans to these companies, they collected warrants from them on the side. But there was no disclosure on how many warrants, which companies, whatever. I was only paying 10 times earnings for the business because no one was interested in these regular companies. Everyone wanted sexy businesses and all that. In a few months after I invested, they started announcing that we monetized 8 of these and we made so much money, and they was dwarfing their earnings. And so that was a case where, you had this unknown basket, but I'm not paying anything for it, right? I didn't know what was in the basket, but it was low risk, high uncertainty, right? We weren't paying for it. And so if the basket was utterly useless, I still have a well-run bank.
In this case, to Mohnish, it was very clear that this was a business that was high uncertainty but low risk. The business was really solid, as he went through and described in that clip. And then it had this uncertain element, which was these warrants. And warrants, for people who are unaware, gives you the right, gives the holder the right. It's issued by the company and gives you the right, but not the obligation, to buy stock at a certain price on a certain date. Very, very similar to stock options. There's a couple of minor differences, but basically the option to buy the stock at a certain price. And Mohnish didn't know which companies they held, or which of those companies would end up being, big companies in the future or go public at all. But it's all upside. It's like buying into a company that's really solid in of itself, but it just happens to have a bunch of lottery tickets as well, right? There's no harm in the company having those lottery tickets, right? As long as you've analyzed the business based on the fundamentals of its core business, and you're not investing with the hope that those lottery tickets turn into be a winner, as long as that's the case, then those lottery tickets, or the warrants in this case, are all upside potential. There's uncertainty, but not much risk associated with it. So that's all we had time for today. Again, I just want to apologize for the noise. I don't even know if I'm going to be posting this video because it sounds horrendous from here. I don't know how it's going to come through on the microphone, so we will see. But if you got some value out of today's video, please leave a like on it, hit subscribe if you want to stay up to date with content that I post in the future. But with that said, hope you guys have a great day. I'll see you in the next video.